Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to this new episode of The Numbers. I'm with Philippe J. Fournier, as always. Philippe, I've missed you so much.
Oh, it's been a while, huh? I've missed you too. I know you've been on vacation. I took staycation, basically. My plan for the vacation was to not have plans. But how were your vacations, Eric? How did it go?
Very relaxing. Really enjoyed it. Had terrific weather where I was out in the Gaspé Peninsula. It was very hot, but we never got any rain. I know here in Ottawa there were storms. There was heat warnings and all this kind of stuff. So really great vacation. But, you know, I had said in our episode, I think our mailbag episode, that I was looking forward to disconnecting. I didn't disconnect as much as maybe I should have, but I was still taking part in the Discord and keeping track of the news. But I still kind of feel like I missed stuff. I feel like I'm just still catching up. Lots happened south of the border, of course, but north of the border, did I miss anything these last 2 weeks that was important to you?
The thing is, the news still keeps going on, even if fewer
even
things
if I'm not
happen,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I know. But thing is, so I guess little things that happen in the summer get blown out of proportions because they have to, the media has to find something to put on the front page. So I'm not sure you missed much. There's apparently, there's discussion about Mark Carney for the 12th time, but this looks to be the right one. I tried to disconnect too, but I went to a U.S. party for July 4th. There was a French election. There was the U.K. election. So, in our Discord, our members, God love them, they don't stop.
Disconnect.
And so they helped me to keep up with the news, even though I tried to slow down, as I said in the previous episode. But, July 18th, where do you want to start? I mean, there's a few polls, there's a few stories. So where do you want to start, Eric?
Well, we can get right into the numbers as we usually do. I do find it interesting as we're recording on Thursday. There was some news about a cabinet meeting apparently happening on Friday, all the rumors you were talking about Mark Carney.
Yeah.
So there might be some developments after we record, and particularly over the weekend, so we'll have to wait and see. So maybe not get too deep into any of that kind of cabinet speculation or whatever is going to happen. But there was a series of polls that came out over the last week, I guess.
Yeah.
And they had some pretty high numbers for the Conservatives, higher than we've seen for a while. 43% for Abacus data, 45% for Main Street, though we've seen often they can have a little bit higher numbers. 42% for Nanos, who has tended to be a bit lower. And then for the Liberals, again, still the same kind of numbers we've seen for the last little while. 23% for the Liberals in Abacus and Main Street, 25% in Nanos. And then for the NDP, 18% for Abacus, 17% for Nanos, and 15% for Main Street. But again, Main Street often has the NDP a little bit lower. Are we seeing anything here?
I was just thinking, if Trudeau does a July cabinet shuffle, last time when they did that, everything went super well right after.
Yeah, that's all they need. Just another reset. One more reset.
It was late July last year when, the numbers had already started to go bad for the Liberals, but they went from bad to absolutely awful right after the cabinet shuffle. Not saying there's a causation here, but it happened. We saw the numbers. So you would think if you do a cabinet shuffle to do a reset, you would do it when people are watching. And late July or second half of July, I don't think people are. But again, their strategy has been a mystery in the past year, so I don't know. So these numbers. Well, no surprise, the NDP is still in trouble. Liberals are not picking up, but I think it's fair to say that we see a floor for the Liberals. At some point around Christmas time, Eric, I think we discussed what would be, the absolute worst poll for the Liberals. And we saw a 21 or 22. But it looks like between 23 and 26 is where they sit right now. And it's bad, 20 points or almost 20 points behind the Conservatives. But we don't see Ignatieff numbers for so far, at least.
Not yet. No. Yeah.
Not yet.
That's the bar, and that's a bad bar. When the only bar you can say that you're clearing is the worst ever performance for the party. Not terrific right now. The polling by Abacus had some just big numbers for the Conservatives. Ontario up 21 points. Yeah. And in Quebec again, the Bloc has sometimes been a little bit higher in the Abacus poll than some of the other ones, but a 12-point lead for the Bloc over the Liberals in Quebec. So seat-wise, this kind of poll would be pretty disastrous. And it goes back to what I said 2 weeks ago. It does, this is another poll where the Liberals are doing a little bit better in Atlantic Canada than we've seen elsewhere. So there might be a tiny little bit of a rebound there, but not clearly enough to save them. There was one thing I really found interesting in the Abacus poll. So they actually asked some questions about Toronto St. Paul's and whether people were aware of it, which is great. I love seeing that because it dominated the news for a while. And you do actually see in the poll that more or less two out of three Canadians were aware that the Liberals lost the by-election. Not surprisingly, lower in Quebec, higher in Ontario. But then they asked the expected winner of the next election. And they broke it down by those who knew about the by-election defeat of the Liberals in Toronto St. Paul's and those who were unaware. Among those who were aware, 58% of respondents thought the Conservatives would win the next election, 17% the Liberals. Those who weren't aware, it was 35% for the Conservatives, 21% for the Liberals. There was a lot more people who just didn't know who was going to win. But it made me feel like among those who are really plugged into politics, they're aware that the Conservatives are on track to win the next election. For those who are not as plugged in, still kind of think that it's anyone's call. It's a toss-up election.
Which is amazing, though. I mean, again, the informed versus uninformed voters, and maybe informed is not the right word because not knowing something... Yeah, engaged. Because not knowing something is not being disinformed or misinformed. We were wondering after St. Paul's whether we would see the numbers move, there would be a wave, there would be ripple effects throughout the country. And I know it's July, but so far the numbers haven't really gotten worse. They haven't gotten better for the Liberals. I don't see significant movement. And what you just said about the Bloc Québécois with 12-point lead over the Liberals, that means a 20-point lead among Francophones.
Right.
And so this, taken alone, this Abacus poll suggests more than 40 seats for the Bloc Québécois, which would be the highest since 2008, right? So it's been a while. But again, as we had mentioned in our previous episode, Eric, the numbers in Quebec fluctuate so much. I mean, Abacus data, yes, seems to have the Bloc Québécois in the mid to high 30s, whereas Léger usually has low 30s, and there's a big difference between those two in our system. So, we'll see. I mean, it's Conservatives in Quebec, if we look at that poll, it's like, okay, that's not that strong. I think they were in the low 20s. Was it
19?
19, yeah. So maybe a strange sample in Quebec, but overall, still a 200 plus seats victory for the Conservatives if those numbers would to stay until next year. So if we get to next year. So
yeah, well, I was thinking about that, the timing of the election. I know some people were asking, whether there could be an election in 2026. I just really don't see that being a possibility. I know technically.
26.
Yeah, I know technically the government could stick around and because constitutionally they only have to go after 5 years after the next election. But I just can't imagine that, especially with all the kind of discussion about the importance of democracy and how it's under threat and all this, and then you extend the life of your government in a way that a lot of people would think would be illegitimate. I don't think that's happening. But there's no, we always talk about how the election is going to be in the fall of 2025. Could happen in the spring. If the election is going to happen anyway, budget not necessarily going to be passable in the spring if the NDP decides they want to at least at that point draw a line in the sand. But so it could be a lot sooner. We could be already in an election year, and now that we're in July. But how do you feel about that?
That's not my preference.
No,
I don't know. Maybe they better ask me first what I want.
I think they should.
They should. I mean, so the election starts at March and goes in late April or something, or maybe in May.
May.
I I guess so, but then what would Doug Ford do? So
Call it the day before.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's
There's
the same
times
writings
actually.
anyway. Yeah.
There was an election in the 40s. Might have been 1940 itself, but where the federal government called an election, and the Liberal government, I think in Ontario, wanted to piggyback on it, so they called it for the same day. And at that point, I think the federal government decided to move it by another week or something, just to screw with the provincial. Anyway, can't remember which one it was, but that actually happened before. There was a thing I want to talk about with the Abacus polling. There was the polling that they did on recognizability.
Yeah.
I thought this was really, really interesting. I'd done something with Polera a little while ago, asking about whether Canadians knew who Pierre Poilievre was, who some of the cabinet ministers were. And Abacus did something similar where, if I understand correctly how this was presented, they showed a picture and asked, do you know who this is? And I think had to put in who it was. And if they didn't, they had to say they didn't know. Maybe we should, I'll just present, first of all, for the federal leaders, 98% of people were able to identify Justin Trudeau. No shock there.
Yeah.
84% Jagmeet Singh. 47% Elizabeth May. Yves-François Blanchet, 49% in Quebec, which was actually a bit lower than I thought it would be. 20% in the rest of the country, or in the country as a whole. And 66% for Pierre Poilievre. When I worked with the Polera for that poll, he was at 57%. So these numbers make sense, and it shows that maybe his recognizability has increased. But what was your takeaway from this poll?
Where do I start? Well, Justin Trudeau, not surprising. I mean, he's been PM for almost a decade, so you would expect, even though 98% feels really high. But I mean, people have known him since almost he was born. Right. Jagmeet Singh, of course, he has physical features that are, recognizable, that are unique in Canadian politics. So let's be fair here. Yves-François Blanchet, 49% in Quebec. There were some of our members that were surprised by this. They thought it was a bit low, and I referred them to a Léger poll that had the likability of like a barometer of Quebec politicians. And it was over a third of Quebecers that did not know who Yves-François Blanchet is. So to show a face, and again, Yves-François Blanchet is, he's a white guy with a light beard and glasses. He's not.
He looks like a Quebecer, really.
Yeah, he looks like a Quebec politician, a white Quebec politician. He's so. And he works in Ottawa. He doesn't have the visibility in Quebec that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has, or François Legault, or the provincial leaders. So the fact that half of Quebecers could identify him, that makes sense. He doesn't have that much of a high profile. And when he became Bloc leader, he was not a star. He was just...
No.
He was not the savior. He became such like a savior because he did take the party and raise it back from 10 seats to 32. But he was not a star. He was doing the noon TV show in Radio-Canada. It was Le Club des Ex. And no, so not. I mean, I don't want to disparage him or the team at Radio-Canada, but it's a noon-hour show on TV. It's not prime time. So I think it's pretty good that half of Quebecers can identify him by this picture. Where go ahead.
Just a note on Blanchet. Maybe they're working on his name recognition, because when I was driving home from vacation, we were passing by the Quebec City region, and I saw a billboard, a Bloc Québécois billboard that was off the highway, talking about, I can't remember what the slogan was, but it was kind of a generic one. It was in English it was the heart in the right place, or something like that. That was
le cœur à la bonne place.
Yeah, that's what it was, and it was a picture of Blanchet on the 20. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. They're at least spending money.
But hang on though, where was it? You say around Lévis or something on the Highway 20 south of Quebec City?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's okay. So that's conservative country. Yeah.
Anyway, I thought it was interesting to note that. Anyway, go ahead on Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre, 66% is pretty good. I mean, Pollara was in the fall. Am I correct about this? Was it after?
It was just before the convention.
Right.
His big convention in Quebec City.
Okay, so it was before the convention. So the makeover had to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's pretty good for the opposition leader to have 2/3 of Canadians recognize him. So for those who say it's low, I mean, 66% is about the turnout in this country on federal elections. So this is pretty good. Again, like do not forget that the regular Joe in this country is not an election nerd like you and I and our members on a Discord. If my test was always my parents. Of course, my dad passed away now, but I asked my mom sometimes, and who's your MP, mom? And I mean, she oftentimes doesn't know, and I have to remind her it's actually Yves-François Blanchet. She lives in Chambly. She was like, oh yeah. Who's that guy? I'm pretty sure if I showed the picture, it says who's your MP among these five, she wouldn't be sure. And if you're listening to this, mom, no offense, but you're my guinea pig. You're my test. Comment tu dis ça? You're my test of the average.
I think guinea pig is actually it. Yeah.
Yeah. It just sounds insulting.
Yeah. Usually doesn't turn out well for those poor animals. But what among those who had a view of or knew who Pierre Poilievre was, Abacus broke down the impressions of him. He was 44% positive, 43% negative. Yeah. So it doesn't suggest that he is recognizable only to people who like him or people who don't like him. It's pretty split. But then on people who didn't recognize him, his net approvals were almost identical. It was 26% positive, 28% negative, which I found really interesting. So people who know Poilievre are kind of split on him. People who don't know who he is are probably split on him just because he's the conservative leader. There was discussion about whether this opens up an opportunity for the Liberals to try to present him, try to frame him a little bit. I don't think so from these numbers, because there isn't really a big difference between the people who do and don't know him.
It's still interesting as a question here, and of course, this is not a knock on Abacus. This is a very interesting poll. I
love this kind of polling.
Yeah, it's great. It's just that it's still interesting. Like, do you recognize this person? No, I don't know who he is. Oh, he's actually the CPC leader. Oh, I don't like him. So people find suddenly an opinion on somebody they did not know like 3 seconds prior. It's interesting, but as you said, these are pretty good numbers for Poilievre. As you said, his likability is split among those who recognize him, and this actually converges to what we had. The number, if you look at favorability of Poilievre, it's evenly split. Trudeau is in the red. Singh is usually a little bit better above water, and Pierre Poilievre is around the even mark. So for me, this makes a whole lot of sense. So. But yeah, like you don't recognize him, but you have an opinion of him. Like, come on. So anyway.
But when you broke it down by vote intention, you did see there was more of a split that the people who recognized him tended to be more conservative because the Conservatives had it would have been a 25-point lead among people who recognized him. But people who didn't recognize him, it was 25 Conservative, 21 Liberal, 21 NDP. Yeah. The fact that the NDP was so high tells me that there might have been a disproportionate amount of younger people who were able to recognize Poilievre. I don't recall if this was broken down. But yeah, it doesn't suggest to me there's a huge opportunity to still frame Poilievre because people probably already have a baked-in opinion about a conservative leader. So there might be some opportunity. There's like 30% neutral among people who didn't recognize him and all that. But the point you said about turnout, how many of the people who don't recognize him are actually going to go out and vote? It almost feels to me like there might be a little bit of a test of political engagement, and so your willingness to actually participate in a question like this. That if you don't know who the leader of the opposition is right now, your odds of voting are probably a lot lower than if you do know who he is.
And also, if I may add, yes, I agree with you, but if I may add as well, I mean, like if conservatives look at this and say, oh, we should really try to improve the recognizability of Pierre Poilievre. No, you don't. You're leading by 20 points right now. Yeah. I mean, if you expose him too much to new voters, you ran the risk of having people not liking him. So again, the Conservatives are playing the trap right now. They're leading by almost 20 points in the average of polls. The worst enemy of the Conservatives is the Conservatives. So they're fine right now.
Yeah. And there was also some polling, since we were just discussing at the beginning, the cabinet meeting and the Mark Carney discussion,
Yeah.
but whether they recognize some top Liberals. They really don't. And it goes again, the number's actually quite similar to what Poilievre had found back then.
Yeah.
39% could name Chrystia Freeland. 20% could name Mélanie Joly. I assume
26.
in Quebec probably a lot higher. No, this was among them.
That's among Liberals. Okay, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Among all Canadians, it was 20%
Yeah.
who could recognize Mélanie Joly. 19% for Anita Anand seemed high, but maybe she had a lot of profile during the pandemic.
Yeah.
7% could recognize Mark Carney. Yee. I mean, maybe he gets a bonus as being like a savior kind of person with a record that comes in, but it doesn't sound like he becomes leader and everyone's like, oh, Mark Carney, I like that guy. I think it would be mostly like, who, Mark Carney.
Yeah.
Who is that again?
They read about that guy, but especially if you go on the Abacus website, you can see the pictures that they use. And Mark Carney's picture right there, he looks like Frank Underwood of House of Cards or something. I mean, it's not saying it's a bad picture, but they're all smiling and looking good, and he's looking super grim. And he doesn't have facial features
serious.
that are unique, right? But
yeah, that's true.
banker.
He doesn't have a very recognizable face compared to, even Sean Fraser, who only was 4%, only 3 points behind him. Has at least a beard. People can remember a beard. And for
tall,
Freeland,
but
Joly, and Anand, they might be a little bit more recognizable. But yeah, the numbers for Carney, it makes me wonder how many people know who Mark Carney is, even if they don't know what he looks like.
Yeah.
But again, that doesn't tell me
7%.
much. It doesn't suggest to me that he is a star. He has a good resume,
Yeah.
but I don't know if people are going to be reading the resume that much. They might just see like, oh, who is this guy? I don't recognize him. Oh, he was the Bank of Canada governor. I don't know who the Bank of Canada governor is now. So the one from a long time ago.
I'll also say though, I mean, there's also a regional element here. I mean, Chrystia Freeland is in Toronto, Mélanie Joly is in Montreal, Anita Anand is in the
Oakville.
GTA, Oakville, yeah. And Sean Fraser is in Nova Scotia. Dominique Leblanc also. Dominique Leblanc 4%. That's really low, but they're from the Atlantic Canada, so they don't have as much exposure. Anita Anand, I mean, you may not know who she is, but she was front and center during the pandemic, right? The procurement minister.
Yeah.
So the fact that 19% can recognize her, it doesn't surprise me. But yeah, so Sean Fraser at 4% is, it's really low. But again, you recognize your local MP more than the ones across the country. So
Probably, but even then. Anyway, some interesting numbers. We appreciate this kind of polling out of the box.
Absolutely.
And it also, because we often talk about how someone's going to impact, voting intentions if they became a leader or views of a finance minister. It's good to always have this baseline and this reminder that while a lot of Canadians might be well aware who the prime minister is, a good amount know the official opposition leader, but beyond that, they're not recognizable figures across the country. And so people's opinions of them aren't going to be very firm and well developed.
And this is obviously, when you think of changing leader, this is the importance of defining your leader. Or if you're the Conservatives in this case, try to define. If let's say, Mélanie Joly became leader of the Liberals after Trudeau, she should expect like a barrage of negative ads on her so that her opponents can define her before she has a chance to do it herself. So interesting numbers from Abacus, and I hope we have those numbers again, like once a year or something. So especially closer to the election. But good stuff from Abacus as always.
Let's get to some provincial numbers. Not too many over the last little while.
Yeah.
Some more from BC. We had a Main Street poll. Tie between the New Democrats and the BC Conservatives, 37% apiece, 12% for the Greens, 10% for BCU. That election's coming pretty soon. We're not getting a lot of numbers, but it does kind of seem from the numbers that we have seen over the last few weeks that the trends might have set in a little bit. There doesn't seem to be as much momentum for one or the other, because Main Street has had a close race between the NDP and the Conservatives before.
Yeah.
So seeing it here in this poll does not suggest to me that anything really has changed over the last, say, month or two.
The March poll from Main Street had NDP at 40 and the Conservatives at 34. The April poll from Main Street had 38-38 and now 37-37. So we still have, not to as big an extent as we had in the fall or in the winter, but we still have a mode disagreement here. Because we had the IVRs having a pretty close race or tied race. Whereas if we look at the latest polls that we had from Angus Reid and Research Co., which are online firms, the NDP is 11 and 7 points ahead respectively. So, I mean, if the NDP leads by 10 points province-wide, they'll win the election, no problem. If it's tied, I think because of the map, the NDP still is favored, but suddenly you have a few question marks. And you could have a surprise because there seems to be much enthusiasm around the new BC Conservatives, even though they're not that new. But Uniteds, are they going to get double digits in the election? The last polls that we had, okay, so Research Co. had the Uniteds at 11. We had one from Liaison at 9%, and Main Street has 10%.
Yeah.
It's, And to think, if we go back to 1 year ago in May, I have this one right here. Research Co. in May 23. So not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago. 1 year and 2 months ago. 46 NDP, 33 Uniteds, 16 Greens, 4 Conservatives.
Wow.
So 1 calendar year changed everything. I think this was the last poll with the Liberal name. I think it was. Anyway, so... No
tough time for BCU.
Yeah.
They lost. I think another MLA who said he was not going to run again. Another one or two over the last little while. So
I lost track. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean things could still go from bad to worse for them. But as you mentioned, no other polls. We still don't have anything from Saskatchewan, New
Brunswick.
For the last little while would be nice, but maybe everybody's saving their polling ammunition for the actual campaign. So we'll see.
We won't have anything before Labor Day. I would be extremely surprised. So.
All right. You put this on our sheet, so I don't know if you want to talk about it, but in the LCBO strike in Ontario.
Yeah, I don't care.
Let's move on then.
I'm kidding. I'm thinking there was a Léger poll, and I figured maybe since you live in Ontario, you'd be interested. I know you live in Ottawa, which is barely Ontario, but.
Well, I filled up at the SAC, as they call it out in the Gaspé, right? Do you call it the SAQ in Montreal?
LaSalle, yeah. We have to be careful because SAQ, Société des Alcools du Québec, but there's also the SAAQ, with la Société d'Assurance Automobile du Québec. So, c'est SAC ou SAAC. We have to be very careful because they're two different things. You don't go to the SAC before you go to the SAAC. Okay, right. So are you aware of the LCBO strike? 89% of Ontario respondents said yes. Has it affected you personally? 15% said yes. So it hasn't made that big of a wave right now. But do you support the unions? 49% said yes, which I thought was a bit high. But 25% said no. So again, this is Ontario. We know there's a lot of disengaged voters in Ontario. What does it mean? Is Doug Ford, digging in his team, digging their heels in fighting the union? I'm not too sure. I added it there because it's July, and I figured that you would care. But good luck. Good luck to the union. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing with the poll I thought was interesting is the way it was framed, right? Because the question was, do you support the LCBO's union demands, which include higher wages and more job security? And people had support for that. But the union is also on strike in part because of the government's move to have more alcohol sales moved outside of the LCBO. So if it had been framed in some way about that, I wonder if there would have been more people who would have responded differently. So it does kind of it does indicate that the way you pose a question, but also the way that the participants frame the issue has a huge impact on the results.
Well. Okay.
We'll see.
We should talk about... There's a by-election coming up.
Very soon.
We don't have the date yet. It has to be called within 12 days from now. I think it's July 30th. And the vote would be held between early to mid-September. It's in LaSalle, Émard, Verdun. We mentioned this one earlier. This was David Lamety's seat, former justice minister. And it should be a safe Liberal seat, but after St. Paul's, there are no more safe Liberal seats. There could be leaning, there could be likely, but safe, I'm not too sure there's that many outside of Ottawa-Vanier. Main Street had a poll. It was all right. A riding poll. We know we have to be careful, especially our summer, July riding poll. But the numbers were pretty much what we expected. So, just over 300 cases in LaSalle, Émard, Verdun, which is on the west and south side of Montreal. 29% Liberal, 26 Bloc Québécois, and 25 NDP. So a three-way race. This is a triple tie. This is a triple statistical tie if we take into account the size of the sample. Eric, you have any thoughts on this?
Well, it definitely means that there could be a race here. A lot of it will depend on the candidates. Main Street didn't input candidate names because for the most part, candidates haven't been named, aside from like the New Democrats, the Greens, people. But the Liberals, and as far as I'm aware, the Bloc does not have a candidate right now. So that will have a big impact. But it could be anybody's to win. So it is going to be a really interesting by-election night. The NDP has a decent candidate in the local councillor, although his little ward doesn't actually overlap with the riding, but he is from that part of the city. But then the Bloc, we don't talk a lot about the Bloc on the island of Montreal, but they only need a couple more points to really be in a position to win this. And anybody could win this with 31%, 30% of the vote.
Yeah.
So it is going to be a heck of a race. And if the Liberals lose it, we've talked about it before, but that's another huge symbolic loss that rattles the cage and makes it all the harder for Trudeau to hang on. So it's going to be an important by-election either way.
I just don't see the Bloc winning this. It doesn't make sense. In that area of Montreal, it doesn't make sense. I mean, they could win. It's just, but I'm saying it doesn't make sense that in that area of Montreal, the Bloc would win. I'm guessing maybe a perfect split between the Liberals and NDP, and the Bloc squeaks in the middle. And the thing is, but I'm assuming also that the Bloc Québécois doesn't have much boots on the ground there because they never expect to win there. So do they have the postal codes and the emails and the phone numbers to have really a ground game? And on the flip side, we read about this after St. Paul's. The Liberals didn't have any ground game in St. Paul's because they never needed it, right? Unless you really have a good ground game and know the addresses, as I said, the postal codes, the emails, the phone numbers. I'm guessing that the Liberals do not have a strong machine in LaSalle et Verdun because they never needed it, and now they need it. So who knows what's going to happen? And you would say, could the NDP win this? Yeah, they could, but they perform so badly in by-elections. Could this be an exception? Maybe if they feel they're more competitive. So these numbers made sense when we looked at the recent polling Quebec-wide, and also when we had a big sample from Léger, we had a greater Montreal. Yeah, the Liberals have lost some ground. I think I said this 2 weeks ago, losing LaSalle et Verdun for the Liberals would be far worse than St. Paul's, and St. Paul was pretty bad, pretty bad loss. Provincially, Québec Solidaire has the seats around this area. So, and Projet Montréal is strong. So you would think the NDP would have boots on the ground. The Parti Québécois doesn't win in that area of Montreal ever. So that's why I'm hesitating to say that. I don't want to say that the Bloc has no chance. It's just that it doesn't make sense that the Bloc could pull this off. But who knows? By-elections can be strange, especially when you have a change election coming 12 months or so from now.
Yeah, and if it's a close three-way race, it'll depend on who just goes out to vote, and so it could end up being a tough one to predict, but definitely be a fun by-election to watch when it happens. We don't know when just yet. All right, let's move to the mailbag. So as usual, we're going to answer one question that we got from our members of our Patreon, and this will be in the public episode, and then we'll answer some more questions afterwards. And I also have a little surprise for our Discord members, so we'll keep that for once we move to the Patreon version of the mailbag. But we got a question from Mark. He says, in your view, is there a way to quantify the odds of a major shift in political fortunes between now and an anticipated election? So the wind's turning back in Trudeau's or François Legault's favor. I find this an interesting question because in the past, I did try to quantify. When I was doing projections maybe 10 years ago, one of the things I wanted to try to figure out was how to forecast in the future, as they kind of do in the United States with using like economic data and that kind of thing to predict how an outcome would be in the future. Like, what are the odds of someone winning, not now, but in a year, 6 months? Yeah. It's not easy to do because there's not a lot of consistency in Canadian politics, and a lot of stuff just kind of happens in the campaign itself. And so it's almost like you just have your ability to predict something with confidence just increases as you get closer to an election. But being able to predict the likelihood of a party jumping 10 points in a year, it seems to me almost impossible.
It's you can do it, but it doesn't mean that it's scientific or it has any predictive value. Like, I could create numbers, say, oh, well, if the economy gets better, the Liberals have a better chance. I mean, it can be done. It's just that we can't predict the future. I mean, if the Middle East blows up, or if Russia attacks a NATO country, or if the economy tanks again, I mean, some things that are plausible but not likely, like everything changes. So it's a good question, Mark. It's just that, again, we do not have a crystal ball in the future. We look at data from the past and recent data and try to infer what, if we make the straight lines here and there. So my answer to that question would be no, we can't do that because we don't know. I mean, if you take a normal election where nothing big happens, it's just a campaign, yeah, you could have a pretty good chance on day one to have a close call on day 36, right? But you don't know that. And the odds, I mean, you could have, okay, I'll have a random one for you. You could have the Juan de Fuca fault line breaking and have a huge tsunami in Vancouver and Seattle. And then how does that change? Yeah, I mean, they're expecting one in the next century. But this is what the question, that's how I read Mark's question, is that can you tell the future, tell fortune of the future? And I'm sorry, but my answer is no, at least not in a scientific way.
I think you could do something, and looking at how much the polls have moved over a 12-month period in the past, and so kind of make a probability of the likelihood of things moving around. So, like right now, you would give the Conservatives, if an election were held today, pretty much 99% chance of winning, right? It would have to be some sort of polling catastrophe for the Conservatives not to win. But if you're forecasting that into the future, what are the odds of a party losing probably the 10 points the Conservatives would need to lose an election? You could probably quantify that, but you would also have to take into account the possibility that their lead grows, right? Yeah. So it would decrease your certainty. Like, maybe instead you'd say, like, there's a 70% chance that the Conservatives will win the next election based on how far the election is, and then it would tick up to 99% once you got to election day. But I'm not sure how useful it is, because it is more or less saying anything can happen. And the closer we get to an election day, less things can happen. And there would be, I think, a way to do it. And you'd have to, as you said, include some wild scenarios in it. But yeah, I'm not sure if it would actually, it would not make, you wouldn't be any or more accurate, right? Because you're predicting the future, and there's no accuracy in the future.
I mean, we haven't mentioned this in this episode, and we won't dwell into it, but the event of last weekend in the States, I mean, could a forecast have predicted that? I mean, I know people shoot each other all the time in the U.S., but usually when you have politicians, or at least high-ranking politicians, there's tons of security, and so the odds that it happens are really low. So, I mean, I've been asked by many radio stations, I've been asked to go on the air to say, okay, how do you think the polls will change after the Trump shooting? I said, what are you talking about? I don't do that, I'm sorry,
how could you predict that?
I could.
They could go up, they could go down. That's only the response you could responsibly give.
But here's the thing. I could go on the air, put on a suit, and do my hair, and have the makeup, and go very confidently and say, well, I think this is going to happen. But I don't do that. Like, it has no value. I'm sorry. It's just, it's just filler. And I really, really don't want to do that. That's not my life. That's not my work.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway.
And it just shows how unpredictable events take place, but also that their repercussions are also pretty unpredictable. And I'm sure if you lined up 50 pundits right now saying which way the polls are going to go after the shooting in the United States, I imagine you would get about as good of an accuracy as if you just asked a monkey to choose between yes or no on a series of questions. And that's just the way it is.
And we're monkeys.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to be replaced by AI, but also not by monkeys. So we got to keep our responsibilities in check. Okay, so we're going to move to the Patreon version of the mailbag. We do have a little quiz we'll have afterwards. And if this is the public episode, we're going to move to the quiz right now. Okay. I do have a little quiz for you, which I've come up off the cuff.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be pretty simple.
Oof, okay.
And it's going to be for you. And what we're going to do, and there's not really a measurement system of this, but I want you to go back in time for each of the federal elections and tell me the leaders of all the parties that won a seat. And see how far back you can go before you make an error. So it's a party that won a seat, not an independent, not in that, but any party that won a seat and who their leaders were for that election. The first ones will be pretty easy, but we'll go back in time.
This is a trick because the thing is, this should be pretty easy, and our listeners will know it. So, if I do make a mistake, I will be humiliated here. Okay. So, when do we start? Like 21? 2021?
We're starting at 21. I'll give you 3 strikes just so we can go back a little bit further in case you make a mistake on the first one. But anyway, go ahead. 2021.
Right. Okay, so Yves-François Blanchet, the leaders that won a seat. I was going to say Elizabeth May, but no, there you go. No, I'm not saying that. Justin Trudeau, obviously, Jagmeet Singh, that's and Erin O'Toole, that's 4. The thing is, Annamie Paul didn't win a seat, so she doesn't count, right?
I'm saying with the leaders of parties who won seats.
Okay, so Annamie Paul.
The parties, so Annamie Paul. That's correct. That's your lineup for 2021. 2019.
2019 was Justin Trudeau, Andrew Scheer, Jagmeet Singh, Yves-François Blanchet, and I guess the Green leader was Elizabeth May, right?
That is correct. All right, you're 2 for 2. 2015.
2015 was Justin Trudeau, Stephen Harper, Monsieur Molker. It was Gilles Duceppe, the return of Gilles Duceppe, and it was also Elizabeth May.
That's correct. Those are the 5 parties who won a seat. 2011.
2011 was Jack Layton, Michael Ignatieff, Stephen Harper. It defeated Gilles Duceppe, and it was Elizabeth May. Yes, it was.
Yes, that was the first election they won a seat. Okay, 2008.
2008 was Stéphane Dion, Stephen Harper, Jack Layton, and Gilles Duceppe.
That's correct. Those are your 4 parties. The Greens did not win a seat in that election. 2006.
2006 was Paul Martin, Stephen Harper, Jack Layton, and Gilles Duceppe.
Correct. 2004.
It's going to be so humiliating. It's okay. If I can clear the 21st century, at least I'll be okay. 2004 was the same for the top 3, so it was Jack Layton's first, right? It was Jack Layton's first election. Stephen Harper, Paul Martin, and Gilles Duceppe.
Yep, there's only 4 parties. All right, 2000.
2000 was Jean Chrétien, Stockwell Day,
Canadian Alliance,
Gilles Duceppe, McDonough for the NDP.
Alexa McDonough.
And Joe Clark for the PCs.
Joe Clark of the PCs. Very good. All right, 1997.
97 was Jean Chrétien of the Liberals. It was Preston Manning. It was Gilles Duceppe. Man, Gilles Duceppe really ran in many elections.
He was there forever.
Yeah. It was the first election of McDonough.
Yes.
And the PCs was Jean Charest.
Very good. All right, 1993.
Okay, 93 was Jean Chrétien. It was who was leader of the NDP? No, Broadbent had left.
First.
Yeah,
obstacle.
it was yeah. Okay, so it was Lucien Bouchard of the Bloc Québécois. Preston Manning, obviously, of the Reform. You know, the Reform had like 200,000 votes in the 88 election, had no seats.
Yeah.
I discovered this only like recently. It's like, okay, so they had a base in Alberta. That they didn't just come out of nowhere. So who did I'm just missing the NDP now.
And
in
another
90.
party.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. The outgoing prime minister. This looks so bad on me. Running in BC, she replaced. I am blanking. This is her. I didn't even play hockey last night. I have no reasons to. Who's the first and still only woman prime minister in this country? People are screaming at us. Why am I blanking on this? I know her name. I know you know.
Like, this is much
mentioned
more enjoyable.
this. We've mentioned this many times. It's just she replaced what's her But hang on, I'm still missing the NDP though. Right?
Yeah, you're still missing the NDP.
Okay, Kim Campbell,
of course.
So I'm sorry, Miss Campbell. I'm sorry. I was okay. So yeah, and she had the the hair. The NDP. I know it was a woman. I have her face. Was it McLaughlin?
Yes.
McLaughlin. So close enough.
And
okay.
it's spelt McLaughlin, but it's pronounced McLaughlin. So I'll give it to you.
Okay, I didn't speak. Couldn't speak English back then.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay,
so
that was
you're
tough.
doing pretty well.
Sorry,
now
Kim
back to.
I'm just blanking. Okay, 88.
Well, see how far back we can go. 1988.
Okay, so Brian Mulroney, John Turner, Ed Broadbent. Was there a fourth? That's it, right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That was your three. 1984.
Well, those same three. Yeah, Brian Mulroney, John Turner, and Ed Broadbent. Was there a fourth? I don't think so. I will say just those three. Is that correct?
That's correct. 1980.
Okay, Pierre Trudeau, Joe Clark. Was it Broadbent? In 80?
You tell me.
Yeah, I'll say Broadbent. Was it?
Yes,
I'll
it
say.
was.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so that's three. I mean, was there? Yeah, I think I'll say those three. Am I missing one?
There was also. No, you're right. It was just those three. You're correct. I was made a mistake. Okay, so you're still good. 1979.
Okay, Pierre Trudeau lost to Joe Clark, and I know at some point in the past we have to go to the Saskatchewan guy, right? But I think it was Broadbent in 79. Yeah, it was Broadbent in 79.
Yeah.
Was there a social credit in 79? I'm not sure how far back I have to go. I think there was, but I really don't. I could not name. I mean, Solon Lowe was in the 50s, so I'm pretty sure he was dead by then. Okay, so there was a social credit, I'm pretty sure, but I can't name the name. I have no idea.
All right, this will be your first strike. It was Fabien Roy.
But he won seats?
Yes, the party won a few seats. And very famously, they didn't support the PCs in the budget vote that defeated the Joe Clark in 1980, or the end of 1979. Okay, 1974.
No, I could not even tell you what he...
1974.
I could not even say what he looked like. So I have one strike. Okay.
Yes.
74.
1974.
Okay, so Pierre Trudeau, the PC guy from Nova Scotia that everybody liked.
I'll need more than that, sir.
Yeah, we had a quiz that I mean, he won like 6 straight elections or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Stanfield for the PCs.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know the NDP. I don't think the Saskatchewan guy. He had left by then. There was a social credit.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't know Fabien Roy. I know Réal Cahouette. Was Réal Cahouette there?
Réal Cahouette was the leader of the Socreds at that point.
Okay.
Still missing one.
I mean, I'm gonna say Tommy Douglas, but I think it was gone by then. Oh, we're in 74 right now, right?
We're in 74.
We're in 74. Yeah, it's not Tommy Douglas. He's gone by then. But I don't know who it is, so I'll take the strike.
Hey, you'll take the strike. It was David Lewis. David Lewis was the leader of the NDP. All right, you got one more strike. This could be at 1972.
Okay, Pierre Trudeau. Stanfield was still there. That was the minority, right? Yeah, so Stanfield was there for the PCs. I'm going to say Réal Cahouette because I have no idea. Réal Cahouette was of the Socreds.
He was still there, yep. Coming down to this one.
I think I'm gonna say Lewis was still there. It was too short a time.
It was David Lewis still. All right, so now we're back down. Now we're down to 1968, and this one you might probably have some. Maybe you might have some issues, but we'll see.
Okay, Pierre Trudeau.
I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't.
That was a hint.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna say Pierre Trudeau. Stanfield, 66. Yeah, Stanfield was gone of Nova Scotia by then, so it was Stanfield. It was Tommy Douglas. Wasn't this the first televised debate? I think it was, right? In 68?
Yeah.
Because I remember the footage with Mr. Douglas. The social credit was there, and since I don't know, I'm going to say it was still Réal Cahouette.
It was actually.
It was!
So you're still doing good. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get back this far. Okay, 1965.
Oh, that's it? Oh, okay.
You're correct, 1965.
Okay, well, Pearson. Who did Pearson beat? I mean, Diefenbaker had been there, but when he lost... Diefenbaker lost in 63. Was he still there? Okay, the 65, I'm going to say Tommy Douglas was the NDP guy. Was there, I mean... By pushing my luck and say Réal Cahouette again? I have no idea. 65. Did Diefenbaker stick around? Diefenbaker won a minority in 57, a big majority in 58, lost in 63. Did he stick around? It was a minority. Okay, I'm going to say Diefenbaker.
Okay, yeah, you still got
yeah, that was
Pearson,
okay.
Diefenbaker, and Douglas, yeah.
Which party do I have left? Oh, no, you can't tell me that. That's I mean, how many elections can Réal Cahouette run in? Okay, Réal Cahouette.
Réal Cahouette was one of them. You're still missing one.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm going to take my third strike here. Who was
at that point? At that point, the Socreds were split between the Ralliement Créditiste, which was Cahouette, and the Social Credit in Alberta still existed as a separate party, and it was Robert Thompson.
Wow.
who was. But you know what? You did really well. You went all the way back to 1968. So we're going to give a nice round of applause. We're going to give a gold star to Philippe for that one.
Fabien Roy. I could not tell you one thing about him. That's on me. That's, of course, I'm not saying he's not important or anything. I mean, he was the leader for.
I don't think he was that important. Yeah.
Well, he was leader for 2 elections. I mean, it's a minor party, but still.
Sure.
So there was the ralliement créditiste and social credit. They could not
there was
get
like
along.
a split between the two because the Alberta wing wanted to retain control, and Cahouette, they felt that was too Quebec, and so they didn't. They kind of split off and did their own thing, and then they eventually re-established under Cahouette afterwards because the Socreds out in Alberta more or less were shut out and became minor. But it didn't work out because for the longest time Cahouette was still pretty popular, and the Socred caucus was primarily from Quebec, and it was run by a guy from Alberta. So anyway, so that was that. But you did very well, and congratulations to Philippe.
Diefenbaker stuck around. I was throwing this out there because interesting.
He was still an MP into the 70s. I think his last election was either 74 or 79, and then he passed away very quickly after that. He was there forever.
Wow.
Okay.
Number of the
week.
I had one right here. Do you want to go first, or should I?
Yeah, mine's a simple one. You already actually mentioned it earlier. You scooped me, but it's 12. As of recording on Thursday, there are 12 days left for the by-election LaSalle, Émard, Verdun to be called. So this is going to happen. Often these by-elections are called on Sunday, so I'm wondering if it is going to be either this Sunday or next Sunday. And we'll find out if they're going to combine it with any of the other ones. Elmwood, Transcona, and Cloverdale, Langley City are both also vacant at the moment. But again, in both of those cases, no word of a Liberal candidate. So maybe they're going to push this to the end, just call the one LaSalle, Émard, Verdun. We'll see. But 12 days, clock is ticking for that by-election call.
If we have a BC by-election the same night as LaSalle, and we have the longest ballot, this is you better have some Red Bull ready.
Well, we'll have breakfast together, yeah.
That's right. My number of the week is a very interesting poll from ResearchCo asking about the name of the province, British Columbia. All things considered, do you agree or disagree? Which one of these ideas? Changing the name of the province to acknowledge its indigenous heritage, and also changing the flag of the province to remove the Union Jack, to have maybe just the rising or setting sun. I'm not sure which one it is, but so it's not very popular. 60% strongly disagree or moderately disagree with changing the name of the province. And 51% strongly or moderately disagree with changing the flag to remove the Union Jack. Sometimes these things should not go with popular opinion. Sometimes you have to do things because they feel right. But I cannot imagine an NDP government pressured by a conservative government, conservative party, going into something that's that controversial. Even though, I mean, earlier in the poll, ResearchCo mentions, as you may know, the Queen Charlotte Islands were renamed Haida Gwaii in 2010 to reflect the native heritage. Most respondents in that poll said they agree with that. So when it's in the past, it feels good. When it's in the future, we're not sure about that. So
also, I find these things are important, obviously, to people that it matters a lot to. But names also take on their own thing the longer they're in. Like when I say British Columbia, I never think about it signifying that it's British. It's just a name at this point, but it doesn't still sound like a qualifier to me. In the same way that New York, no one thinks about it as the New York. It's eventually a name becomes its own kind of thing. But people don't like change in general, so I'm not surprised with the response to that.
Wasn't York Toronto? Toronto was called York for a long time, right?
Yeah. But so it wasn't the new Toronto.
It wasn't.
No, it was the York over in England.
Interesting. Oh, well.
Yeah. Anyway, so that'll be it for this.
You learn so much on this podcast, right?
This is what we do. We're educating each other every day, and we appreciate our members also educating us on the Discord, which you can join if you join our Patreon at thenumberspod.ca. And you get the extended mailbag. You get the exclusive episodes this week because it's been a bit Just coming back from vacation. We don't have an exclusive Patreon episode this week, but we will, of course, later on in the summer. And also, you just give us your support, which we really appreciate. So, Philippe, we're back into it a little bit. I think it's still going to be kind of light in terms of our content. And because I said that, something really big is going to happen in the next few days. And if it does, we will chat about it in a week.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very much for your support. And Eric, talk to you in 7 days. Thank you.